Hello, my dear viewers. Today will be a very interesting story. I recommend watching the video to the end. Put a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and be sure to write comments on what you liked or did not like, and if you have an interesting criminal story from your life. Write your story in the comments and I will make a video and tell your story here on the channel. Okay, I have detained you. I wish you a good mood and viewing. Hello, everyone. My name is Emma Harris, and I never thought I'd be telling this story, let alone living it. But I feel like you need to know what happened because maybe, just maybe, it could save someone else. It all began when I moved into the old Victorian house at the edge of town. I'd just gotten a promotion at work, which was a big deal for me. The house was gorgeous, tall, grand windows, intricate woodwork, and the kind of charm that only comes with age, the best part. It was surprisingly affordable, too affordable, actually. But at the time, I just thought I'd gotten lucky. The real estate agent told me the previous owner had moved out abruptly, but I didn't pry. I was too caught up in imagining how I'd decorate the place. If I'd asked more questions, maybe things would have turned out differently. From the moment I stepped inside, something felt off. It wasn't anything obvious, just a sensation like the air was heavier than it should be. I laughed it off as nerves. After all, living alone in a big, unfamiliar house is bound to feel a little strange, right? The first few nights were quiet, almost peaceful. I spent my evenings unpacking and getting settled, but then I started to notice little things. At first, it was small stuff, doors slightly ajar when I was sure I'd closed them, my keys not being where I'd left them. I blamed it on my own forgetfulness, but then, one night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Clear, deliberate footsteps coming from the hallway. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I forced myself to get up and check, but when I stepped into the hallway, it was empty. I told myself it was the house settling, though deep down, I wasn't convinced. The next morning, I decided to explore the house more thoroughly. There were rooms I hadn't really paid attention to yet, like the attic. The entrance was a small hatch in the hallway ceiling with a pull-down ladder. I hesitated before climbing up, my curiosity warring with unease. The attic was dusty and full of boxes. Most of them contained old clothes and knickknacks that looked like they belonged to the previous owner. But tucked in the corner, I found something that made my blood run cold: a journal. The cover was worn, and the pages were filled with neat handwriting. The entries were strange. At first, they talked about the joy of moving into the house, how beautiful and peaceful it was. But as the entries continued, the tone changed. The writer described hearing whispers, feeling watched, and finding strange symbols carved into the woodwork. The last entry read, "I see them now. They're always watching. I can't stay here. If you're reading this, leave. Before it's too late." I should have packed up and left right then and there, but I didn't. Maybe I didn't believe it, or maybe I was too stubborn to admit I'd made a mistake. Either way, I stayed, and that's when things got worse. The next night, I woke up to the sound of whispers. They weren't loud or clear, just faint enough to make my skin crawl. I couldn't make out the words, but they were unmistakable. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I covered my ears and squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to fall back asleep. But sleep didn't come easily. In the morning, I noticed something new: scratches on the walls. Thin, jagged lines that hadn't been there before. They looked almost like symbols, but I couldn't decipher them. I tried scrubbing them off, but they wouldn't budge. That was when I called the real estate agent. "Oh, those are probably just from the previous owner," she said, her tone dismissive. "Old houses have their quirks, you know." Her response didn't sit well with me, but I let it go. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Instead, I tried to focus on work, on anything that would keep my mind off the house. But it didn't matter how much I tried to distract myself. The whispers came back, louder this time, and the scratches kept spreading. One night, I woke up to find my bedroom door wide open. I was sure I'd closed it. My heart pounded as I stared into the dark hallway, half expecting to see someone standing there. But the hallway was empty. I got up and shut the door, locking it this time. Still, I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. But then something happened that I couldn't explain away. I came home from work to find all the lights on in the house. Every single one, even though I was certain I'd turned them off before leaving. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but nothing was missing. The doors and windows were all locked. It didn't make any sense. Desperate for answers, I went back to the attic and started digging through the boxes again. That's when I found the photographs. They were old black and white images of people standing in front of the house. At first, they seemed innocent enough, just families posing for the camera. But as I looked closer, I noticed something chilling. In every photo, there was a shadowy figure in the background. It was faint, almost easy to miss, but it was there, always in the same spot, watching. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I knew then that whatever was happening in this house was far beyond my understanding. But it wasn't until I saw the last photo that I truly felt fear. It was a picture of me standing in the attic, holding the journal. And in the background, just behind me, was the shadow. The discovery of the photos left me shaken. I spent the entire night sitting in my living room, every light in the house turned on. I didn't feel safe anywhere. I kept replaying the moment I saw that shadow behind me in the photo. How could it have been there without me noticing? By morning, I knew I couldn't face this alone anymore. I called my friend Lisa, who'd been one of the few people to warn me about the house. "You're not going to believe this," I said when she arrived. She listened intently as I recounted everything, the whispers, the scratches, the journal, and finally, the photos. Her expression darkened. "Emma, this isn't normal. You need to leave." "I can't just pack up and go," I argued. "Where would I even go? And what if this follows me?" Lisa suggested calling a professional, a paranormal investigator, or someone who could at least give me answers. Desperate, I agreed. She found someone online who specialized in haunted spaces, and we set up an appointment for later that week. In the meantime, the house didn't let up. The scratches on the walls grew longer and deeper, stretching across every room. The whispers became louder, more insistent. And then there were the voices, distinct and clear, but always just out of reach. They seemed to come from inside the walls. One evening, as I sat in the kitchen trying to distract myself with work, I heard a thud from the living room. I froze, my heart racing. Slowly, I got up and peeked around the corner. The heavy antique mirror that hung above the fireplace had fallen, shattering into countless pieces. And on the wall where it had been, there were new scratches, symbols I didn't recognize, carved deep into the plaster. Lisa stayed with me that night, refusing to leave me alone. We both heard the whispers and the occasional thud, but neither of us could bring ourselves to investigate further. It felt like the house was alive, like it was watching and waiting for us to make a move. The paranormal investigator arrived on a dreary Thursday afternoon. His name was Samuel Grant, and he carried an air of quiet confidence that made me feel slightly less terrified. He was an older man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight through me. After I explained everything, Samuel walked through the house, taking notes and murmuring to himself. He examined the scratches on the walls, the attic, and even the shattered mirror. When he returned to the living room, his expression was grave. Samuel sat across from me in the living room, the journal open on his lap. The dim light from the single-floor lamp cast long shadows on the walls, making the room feel even more oppressive. His expression was serious, his voice low as he spoke. "This house, it's not just haunted," he began. "It's something far older, far darker. These symbols you've been seeing, they're not random. They're marks of a binding, an attempt to trap something here." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "Trap what?" Samuel hesitated, his eyes darting to the scratches on the wall behind me, a presence malevolent. "It's been here for decades, maybe longer. The people who lived here before, they tried to contain it. But something must have gone wrong." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. "Why is it focused on me?" He shook his head. "It's not you specifically. It's anyone who enters this house. But the longer you stay, the stronger its hold becomes. It feeds on fear, on doubt. That's why the activity has been escalating." Lisa, who had been sitting silently in the corner, finally spoke. "So, what do we do? How do we stop it?" Samuel closed the journal and set it aside. "We need to find the source, the thing that ties it here. It could be an object, a relic, something hidden within the house. Destroying it might weaken the entity enough to drive it out." The thought of searching the house for something so sinister sent a chill down my spine. "And if we don't find it?" Samuel's silence was answer enough. That night, Lisa insisted on staying with me again. Samuel promised to return the next day with equipment to help locate the source. I felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief that I wasn't alone in this, and dread at the thought of what we might uncover. We tried to sleep, but the house had other plans. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. They seemed to echo through the walls, overlapping and intertwining until it was impossible to tell where one voice ended and another began. Then came the banging. It started in the attic, heavy and deliberate, like someone was stomping across the floor. Lisa and I sat up in bed, our eyes wide with fear. "Don't go up there," she whispered, gripping my arm. "I won't," I promised, though part of me felt drawn to the noise, like it was daring me to investigate. The banging continued for hours, each thud reverberating through the house. Neither of us slept. By morning, I felt like a ghost myself, my body heavy with exhaustion. When Samuel returned, he brought with him an array of tools. A thermal imaging camera, a device he called an EMF meter, and a bundle of what looked like dried herbs. "We're going to conduct a sweep of the house," he explained. "Whatever is here will react to this equipment. We might be able to pinpoint its location." The search began in the attic. Samuel scanned the space with the thermal camera while Lisa and I followed closely behind. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and the scratches on the walls seemed deeper, more jagged than before. "There," Samuel said suddenly, pointing at the far corner. The thermal camera showed a cold spot, unnaturally cold despite the summer heat outside. Something's there. We approached cautiously, our footsteps creaking on the wooden floorboards. Samuel reached into the corner and pulled out an old wooden box, its surface covered in the same symbols that adorned the walls. "This might be it," he said, his voice tight with anticipation. "What's inside?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Samuel hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside was a small, weathered doll, its glass eyes staring blankly ahead. Its dress was tattered, and its porcelain face was cracked. The sight of it made my stomach turn. "This is the anchor," Samuel said. "Whatever spirit is here, it's tied to this." "What do we do with it?" Lisa asked. Samuel's expression darkened. "We destroy it, but we need to be careful. Once we break the connection, the entity might lash out." Samuel set the box on the attic floor and began preparing the herbs, lighting them so that they smoldered, releasing a pungent, earthy aroma. He motioned for Lisa and me to stand back. "Whatever happens, don't interfere," he warned. The moment he touched the doll, the temperature in the attic plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs, and an oppressive weight pressed down on my chest. The whispers returned, louder than ever, overlapping into a deafening cacophony. Samuel muttered an incantation under his breath, his hands steady despite the growing chaos around us. The symbols on the walls seemed to writhe, shifting and twisting as though alive. Then, with one swift motion, he shattered the doll against the floor. A scream pierced the air, unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't human. It was raw, primal, filled with rage and despair. The room shook violently, and I thought the floor might give way beneath us. Lisa clung to me, her nails digging into my arm. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped, the air grew still, heavy with silence. The scratches on the walls faded, the oppressive presence lifting like a weight being removed from my chest. Samuel stood, visibly shaken but composed. "It's done," he said. The days following the confrontation were eerily quiet. The house felt different, lighter, as though a dark cloud had been lifted. I cleaned the attic, disposing of the broken pieces of the doll and the box. Samuel assured me the spirit was gone, but I couldn't shake the lingering unease. Lisa moved in with me temporarily, unwilling to let me stay alone until I was sure the house was safe. I slept through the night for the first time in weeks, though I still woke up expecting to hear whispers or see scratches on the walls. But they never returned. Samuel checked in periodically, offering reassurance and advice. "If anything changes, call me," he said before leaving for what he called his next case. "But I think you're going to be just fine." And for a while, I was. The house became a home again. The scars it had left behind both on the walls and in my mind began to fade. But every now and then I catch myself glancing at the shadows, half expecting to see something watching me. Because some part of me can't help but wonder, what if it wasn't destroyed? What if it's just waiting? Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This will help me work better and faster for you. I would be grateful, so watch my other videos. Hello my dear viewers, I would like to thank you for watching the video, and I wanted to say subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will be very grateful and you will not miss new videos. Enjoy the video. My name is Jason Hill, and if you're hearing this, I guess I made it out alive. Or maybe I didn't. Honestly, I'm not even sure anymore. This all started 2 weeks ago, but it feels like it's been years. Sometimes the past and present blur together in ways that make you question what's real. Anyway, I need to start at the beginning. I need someone to know what happened. It was just another Monday night, or so I thought. I'm a delivery driver, working nights to pay off some student loans. Most of my routes are boring, quiet suburban neighborhoods or downtown offices where no one even bothers to say thanks. But that night was different. I got a call from dispatch just before my shift ended. "Hey, Jason," they said. "One last delivery for the night. It's a priority package. No signature required, just drop it off." I groaned. Of course, they give me the weird ones. But overtime meant extra cash, so I took the address. It wasn't far, just a few miles out of town. The place was called Silverwood Heights. Now, I've lived in this area my whole life, but I'd never heard of Silverwood Heights. It wasn't on my GPS either. I had to use an old map I found in the glove compartment. That should have been my first clue to turn around, but I was too tired to care. The road out there was narrow and dark, surrounded by nothing but trees. No street lights, no houses, just this eerie emptiness. When I finally found the place, I almost missed it. The sign was old and half hidden by vines. Silverwood Heights wasn't a neighborhood, it was an old, run-down apartment complex. The kind of place you don't want to be after dark. The windows were boarded up, and the air smelled like mildew and rust, but there was one light on. Just one, flickering above Unit 12. I grabbed the package from the back seat. It was small, about the size of a shoebox, and heavier than I expected. No return address, just the words "deliver to Unit 12. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Just that light, flickering like it was about to give up. I thought about leaving the box on the porch and driving off, but something told me to wait. After a few seconds, the door opened just a crack. I couldn't see who was inside, but I heard a voice. It was soft, almost a whisper. "Come in," they said. My heart sank. I didn't want to go in there, but the tone of their voice. It was off, not scared, not angry, just hollow. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The place was worse on the inside. The walls were bare, stained with watermarks and God knows what else. The air was cold, colder than it should have been. There was furniture, but it was all wrong, like someone had moved in decades ago and never left. I called out, "Hello. I have your delivery." No answer. Just silence. Then I saw it. In the middle of the living room, there was a table, and on the table was a note. Just one line, scrawled in messy handwriting. "Don't look inside the box." I stared at it, feeling my pulse quicken. I told myself it was just a joke, someone messing with me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I should have left. I should have walked out and never looked back, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. I sat the box down on the table, next to the note. My hands were shaking as I reached for the lid. I wasn't going to open it just to check if it was taped shut. But before I could touch it, I heard something behind me. It was faint, but clear enough to make me freeze. Someone or something was there. I spun around, expecting to see the owner of the apartment, but there was nothing. Just the open doorway and that flickering light outside. That's when the box fell, not tipped over, fell like someone had pushed it. It hit the floor with a thud and the lid popped open. I couldn't stop myself. I looked. The box hit the floor with a heavy thud, and the lid slid open just enough for me to see inside. At first, I thought it was empty, but then I noticed something small, barely visible. At the bottom, it was wrapped in a dark cloth. My stomach churned. Whatever was in there. It wasn't right. I hesitated. The note's warning, "Don't look inside the box," was screaming in my head. But curiosity has a way of digging its claws into you, doesn't it? Slowly, I reached down and peeled back the cloth. That's when I saw it. It was an old photograph. Black and white, faded around the edges. At first, I couldn't make out what it was. A house, maybe. No, not a house. A room, empty, except for a chair. And sitting in that chair was me. I froze. The photo was grainy, but it was unmistakable. The same jacket, same jeans, even the scar on my left hand. It was me sitting in a chair, staring at the camera with this blank expression. But here's the thing: I'd never been in that room before. Never seen it in my life. I wanted to believe it was some kind of trick, a doppelganger, maybe. But as I stared at the photo, a memory surfaced. A dream, or something that felt like a dream. I remembered sitting in that chair, staring at the camera. I remembered someone or something standing behind the lens. I slammed the lid back on the box and stood up. My legs were shaking. I didn't know what to do. My instinct was to leave, to run out of that apartment and never come back, but as I turned toward the door, I saw it. Another note. This one was taped to the inside of the door. It hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. The handwriting was the same as the first note, messy and rushed. It said, "You've been chosen. Do not leave." I felt trapped. My mind was racing, trying to piece it all together. Chosen for what? Who left the notes, and why me? I grabbed the box and headed for the door anyway. Screw the warnings, I wasn't sticking around to find out what they meant. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, something changed. The flickering light above the door was gone. The air felt heavier, thicker, like the walls were closing in. And then I heard it, a sound that made my skin crawl. It was coming from the far end of the hall. Steady, deliberate, getting closer. I couldn't see anyone, but I knew I wasn't alone. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear myself think. I backed up toward the stairs, clutching the box like it was a lifeline. That's when I saw them. Two figures, standing in the shadows. Their outlines were just barely visible, but their eyes, those I could see clearly, pale, glowing, and locked right on me. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching. I didn't wait to find out what they wanted. I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping over myself. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air. But the second I hit the parking lot, I realized something was wrong. My car was gone. The lot was empty. I spun around, trying to make sense of it. That's when I saw the building, or rather, where the building had been. Silverwood Heights was gone. In its place was nothing but an empty field, overgrown with weeds and littered with broken concrete. It was like it had never been there. The box was still in my hands. I thought about throwing it into the field, leaving it behind. But before I could, I heard something, a voice. Quiet at first, then louder. It wasn't coming from inside the box. It was coming from me. I dropped the box and ran. I didn't stop running until I made it back to my apartment. But even now, I can still hear that voice, and I can feel them watching me. For 2 days, I stayed locked in my apartment. I didn't go to work, didn't answer my phone. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, those glowing eyes in the hallway, staring at me like they were waiting for something. And that voice, "Do not leave," it kept playing over and over in my head like a song I couldn't shut off. I thought I was losing my mind. I threw out the clothes I'd worn that night, burned the map I used to find Silverwood Heights. Anything to erase the memory, but the box, I couldn't get rid of it. I left it outside my apartment door, hoping someone would take it. But every time I checked, it was still there, like it was waiting for me to bring it back inside. The morning of the 3rd day, there was a knock at my door. Not the mailman, not my landlord. It was soft, deliberate. Like whoever was on the other side knew I was there but wasn't in any rush. I froze, my heart pounding. Then the knocking stopped, and I heard the faint rustle of paper sliding under the door. I waited a few minutes before I opened the door. No one was there, but there was a note. Same handwriting as before, messy and uneven. It said, "You still have time. Bring the box back." Underneath was an address I didn't recognize. Someplace called Ravenwood Grove, 3 towns over. I wanted to ignore it, to throw the note in the trash and pretend it didn't exist. But something about that name Ravenwood Grove, it got under my skin. I didn't know how, but it felt familiar. Like I'd heard it before, though I couldn't remember where. By the time the sun set, I was already on the road. I told myself it was just to get answers, to end whatever this was once and for all, but deep down I knew the truth. I wasn't in control anymore. Whatever was happening, it was pulling me along like a puppet on a string. The drive to Ravenwood Grove took 2 hours. Most of it was on empty highways, surrounded by trees and farmland. The kind of drive that makes you feel like the world's just a little too big. When I finally found the place, it was almost midnight. Ravenwood Grove wasn't a town or even a neighborhood. It was a single house sitting at the end of a dirt road. The house was old but not abandoned. The windows glowed faintly, like there were lights on inside. A cold breeze cut through the air, carrying the faint smell of damp wood and decaying leaves. I grabbed the box from the passenger seat and stepped out of the car. When I saw the box with my name written on it, I felt the world tilt. My own handwriting, how was that even possible? My first instinct was to run, but where would I go? It was like every road led me right back to this moment. I had no choice but to open it. Sound effect, faint echo as Jason slowly opens the box. Jason narration. Inside, I found a photograph and a key. The photograph was black and white, just like before, but this time it was clearer. It showed me standing outside my childhood home at 19 Ashwood Lane. In the background, someone or something was watching from the window. My hands started to shake as I picked up the key. It was old, rusted, and ice-cold. But the moment I touched it, everything fell into place. Sound effect, faint whispers growing louder, morphing into a rush of air. Jason narration. Memories flooded back, ones I didn't even know I had. I remembered sitting in a chair, staring at a camera. The darkness surrounding me, the whispers telling me what to do. And then, a voice, my own voice, but colder, commanding me to deliver the box. That's when I realized this wasn't the first time I'd been here. Sound effect, Jason's breath quickens, faint heartbeat thumping. Jason narration. The memories weren't from dreams. They were real. I had delivered a box before. Years ago, to someone else. I didn't know why or how, but I knew one thing for certain: whatever this was, it was a cycle. One that I was now trapped in. Sound effect, low hum, faint wind blowing through the room. Jason narration. I had to finish it. I had to take the box to the address written on the tag, 19 Ashwood Lane, my childhood home. The place where it all began. Sound effect, Jason's footsteps echoing, music building in intensity. Crime Story script, Episode 1, Part 5 revised. Intro music begins, quiet and foreboding. Jason narration. I pulled up to 19 Ashwood Lane just after sunset. The house looked the same as I remembered, small, with peeling paint and broken shutters. But something about it felt off, like it was alive and waiting for me. The key in my hand felt heavier with each step I took toward the door. Sound effect, gravel crunching underfoot, faint wind rustling leaves. Jason narration. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the memories hit me like a tidal wave. This was where it started. Years ago, I'd found the same box on this very doorstep. I'd opened it, found the key, and followed its instructions to deliver it to someone else. It had been passed to me, just like I was passing it on now. The house was part of it, too. A piece of the puzzle. Sound effect, door creaking shut. Jason's breathing grows unsteady. Jason narration. The air inside was thick, suffocating. The walls seemed to hum, almost like they were alive, and then I heard it, the voice. My voice, coming from the darkness at the end of the hallway. Jason's voice, cold and distorted. You've come full circle. Sound effect, faint whispers, growing louder. Jason narration. I followed the sound, even though every part of me screamed to turn back. The hallway led to a single room, the same room I'd seen in the photographs. The chair was there, sitting under a single light bulb that flickered weakly. On the chair was another box, identical to the one I'd been carrying. And standing behind it was me. Sound effect, sudden rush of air, music crescendos. Jason narration. The figure looked just like me, but its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. It smiled, cold and unfeeling. You understand now, don't you? It said, this is your purpose. To carry the box, to pass it on, just like I did. Jason narration. My knees went weak as the truth slammed into me. This wasn't just a coincidence or a random nightmare. It was a cycle, one that had been going on for years, maybe decades. Each person who received the box became the next in line, delivering it to the next target. And now it was my turn to pass it on. Sound effect, faint ticking of a clock, echoing footsteps. Jason narration. The figure handed me the new box, and as soon as I touched it, the room disappeared. I was standing outside again, under the glow of the street lights, holding the box. But this time, there was a new name written on it, a new address, a new target. Sound effect, Jason's heartbeat, slow and deliberate. Jason narration. I don't remember how I got back to my car. I don't even remember driving home, but now, as I sit here writing this, I know what I have to do. I have to deliver the box to you. Dramatic sound sting, fading to silence, text on screen, the cycle continues. What would you do if the box was delivered to you? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more chilling stories. Outro music fades in, haunting and unresolved. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This will help me work better and faster for you. I would be grateful, so watch my other videos. Hello my dear viewers. Today will be a very interesting story. I recommend watching the video to the end. Put a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and be sure to write comments on what you liked or did not like, and if you have an interesting criminal story from your life. Write your story in the comments and I will make a video and tell your story here on the channel. Okay, I have detained you. I wish you a good mood and viewing. I never thought my life would take the turn it did. My name's Charlotte Hayes. I'm 36, a single mother to a 17-year-old boy named Ethan, and until a year ago, I thought I had everything under control. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, doesn't it? It all started on a Thursday evening at Café Loon, a cozy little spot in downtown Boston where I worked as a waitress. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I loved the regulars who came in, each with their own quirks and stories. That's where I met him, Vince Delacroix. The first time I saw him, he was sitting at the far corner table, dressed in a crisp navy suit that looked like it cost more than my entire year's salary. He had this aura about him, confidence, power, and a hint of danger that made my heart race in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Can I get you anything else?" I'd asked, holding my pen nervously over my notepad. He glanced up, his deep green eyes locking with mine. "Just your name," he said smoothly, a faint smile playing on his lips. That was the beginning. Vince started coming to the cafe regularly, always sitting in the same spot, always asking for me to take his order. He was charming, attentive, and had this magnetic quality that drew me in like a moth to a flame. I knew there was something off. He was too polished, too secretive, but I ignored the warning bells. I hadn't dated anyone seriously since Ethan's dad walked out on us when he was a baby. I told myself it was time to let someone in, to take a chance. Vince made me feel seen, like I was more than just a struggling single mom trying to make ends meet. Ethan, on the other hand, wasn't thrilled when I told him about Vince. "Mom, you don't even know him," he said one night after I mentioned I had plans with Vince for dinner. "I know enough," I replied, feeling defensive, "and he makes me happy. That's all that matters, isn't it?" Ethan didn't argue, but I could tell he didn't trust Vince. Maybe it was just teenage stubbornness, or maybe he didn't like the idea of someone stepping into his dad's place. I brushed it off, too caught up in the whirlwind of my new romance to see the cracks forming around me. It wasn't until weeks later that I started noticing the little things about Vince, the way his phone was always buzzing, but he'd never answer in front of me. The vague answers he gave when I asked about his work. And then there was the night he picked me up in a car I could only describe as mobster chic, with tinted windows and an entourage of men who looked like they'd walked straight out of a gangster movie. "Who are they?" I'd asked nervously as we drove to the restaurant. "Business associates," he said with a shrug, his tone casual but his grip on the wheel tight. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this man who made me laugh, who looked at me like I was the only woman in the world, was just another successful businessman with a few eccentricities. But deep down, I knew the truth was far darker than I wanted to admit. It was a chilly Friday evening when Vince invited me to his estate for the first time. Estate might be an understatement. It was more like a fortress. The sprawling mansion sat at the end of a long, tree-lined driveway, surrounded by high walls and guarded by men who looked like they hadn't smiled in years. "Wow," I whispered as he led me inside. The interior was a stunning mix of modern luxury and old-world charm, with marble floors, ornate chandeliers, and walls lined with priceless art. "Like it?" Vince asked, his hand resting lightly on my back. "It's overwhelming," I admitted, my voice tinged with awe and unease. "Get used to it," he said with a wink. "This is your life now." I laughed nervously, but his words lingered in my mind. Your life now. I wasn't sure if he meant it as a promise or a warning. As the weeks passed, I began to see more of Vince's world, and it terrified me. I couldn't ignore the phone calls he took behind closed doors, the late-night meetings with men whose faces were hardened by years of violence. I'd catch snippets of conversations, words like shipment, territory, and cleanup that made my stomach churn. One evening, while Vince was out, I decided to snoop. It wasn't something I was proud of, but my gut was screaming that something was wrong. I found a locked drawer in his study, and after searching his desk, I discovered the key. Inside were files, photographs, and maps. One file caught my eye. It had the name of a local shipping company scrawled on the tab. I flipped it open to find lists of names, transaction amounts, and dates. My heart pounded as I realized I was looking at evidence of smuggling operations, money laundering, and even murders. I slammed the drawer shut and hurried back to the living room, my hands trembling. When Vince returned, he noticed my unease immediately. "Something wrong, Charlotte?" he asked, his voice calm but his eyes sharp. "No," I lied, forcing a smile, "just tired." He didn't press, but I could feel his gaze lingering on me longer than usual. Things came to a head 2 weeks later when Ethan came home one evening with a black eye and a split lip. "What happened?" I demanded, rushing to his side. "It's nothing," he muttered, brushing me off. "It's not nothing," I insisted. "Who did this to you?" Ethan hesitated, then sighed. "Mom, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise not to freak out." I sat down, bracing myself. "Okay, I promise." "I've been working with this group," he began, his voice low. "We're trying to expose criminal organizations in the city, bring them down from the inside, and Vince is one of our targets." The room spun. "What are you talking about?" "Mom, Vince is a crime lord," Ethan said bluntly. "He runs one of the biggest mafia operations in the city. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking, you name it. He's involved." I shook my head, refusing to believe it. "No, that's not true. Vince isn't like that. He's dangerous, Mom," Ethan interrupted. "You have to get away from him. If he finds out what I'm doing, he won't think twice about coming after me or you." Tears filled my eyes as the weight of Ethan's words sank in. The man I'd fallen for wasn't just a businessman with a mysterious side. He was a monster. That night, I lay awake, torn between my feelings for Vince and the desperate need to protect my son. By morning, I knew there was no way this could end well. After Ethan's revelation, I felt like I was walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. Every moment with Vince felt like a lie, every glance from him a potential threat, but I couldn't let him see my fear. If he suspected that Ethan or I knew the truth, I didn't even want to imagine what he might do. Ethan begged me to leave Vince immediately. "We'll go somewhere far away," he said. "Change our names, disappear. He'll never find us." But I knew it wasn't that simple. Vince had connections everywhere. Running wouldn't guarantee safety, and if I left abruptly, it might raise suspicions, putting us in even greater danger. For now, I had to stay. I had to pretend. That evening, Vince surprised me with a weekend getaway plan. "Pack your bags," he said, his voice full of excitement. "I've got something special lined up for us." "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to sound thrilled. "It's a surprise," he replied with a wink. "You'll love it." As I packed my things, my heart raced. I didn't trust this trip, but I couldn't refuse. If I acted differently, if I slipped up, it could all be over. Ethan was furious when I told him. "You can't go with him, Mom. What if he's setting you up?" I squeezed his hand, trying to reassure him. "I'll be careful, Ethan, I promise." Before I left, Ethan slipped a small recording device into my purse, just in case, he said. "If he says anything incriminating, we can use it to bring him down." The trip was to a secluded cabin in the mountains, miles away from any signs of civilization. The view was breathtaking: snow-capped peaks, endless forests, but I couldn't enjoy it. The isolation made my skin crawl. Over dinner, Vince was his usual charming self, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was testing me. His questions felt pointed, his smiles a little too knowing. "You've been quiet lately," he said, pouring me a glass of wine. "Everything okay?" Of course, I lied, forcing a smile. "Just a lot on my mind." He murmured, studying me. "You know, Charlotte, trust is everything in a relationship. Without it, there's no foundation." The words felt like a blade against my neck. "I trust you," I said quickly, "completely." He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Good. Because I'd hate to find out you were keeping secrets from me." That night, as Vince slept, I turned on the recorder and placed it near his phone, hoping to catch something useful. I knew it was risky, but it was the only way to gather evidence without drawing suspicion. The next morning, Vince announced we'd be heading back to the city earlier than planned. "Something's come up with work," he explained. My stomach sank. I knew that couldn't be good. When we returned, I hurried to Ethan's room, handing him the recorder. "Check this," I whispered. "I don't know if it caught anything, but it's all we've got." Ethan plugged it into his laptop and began playing the audio. At first, it was just background noise, muffled footsteps, the sound of the fireplace crackling. But then we heard Vince's voice. "The kid's name is Ethan Hayes. He's been digging where he shouldn't. Make sure he understands what happens when people cross me." My blood turned to ice. "Mom," Ethan whispered, his face pale. He knows it's me." Panic set in as I realized Vince wasn't just suspicious, he was preparing to act. "We have to do something," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "We have to stop him before it's too late." But what could we do against someone like Vince? I didn't have an answer. I didn't sleep that night. Vince knew about Ethan, and I had no idea how much time we had before he made his move. The walls of my world felt like they were closing in, and I could hardly breathe. By morning, I had decided on a plan, though calling it a plan might have been a stretch. I would confront Vince, distract him, and give Ethan enough time to disappear. It was risky, but it was the only chance we had. "You're quiet again," Vince said as we had breakfast. His voice was calm, but his eyes held that unnerving sharpness I'd come to fear. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" "Of course," I replied, forcing a smile. "I'm just tired." "I think there's more to it than that," he said, his tone darkening. He leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking onto mine. You wouldn't lie to me, would you, Charlotte? No, I said quickly, my heart pounding. Why would you even think that? He didn't answer. Instead, he stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. Loyalty is everything to me, he said quietly, when people betray me. Well, let's just say I make sure they regret it. I felt the blood drain from my face. He wasn't just talking, he was warning me. That afternoon, I pretended everything was fine, playing the role of the loving girlfriend while secretly texting Ethan. Me, he knows. You need to get out of the city. Now, Ethan, not without you. Me, Ethan, please don't argue. Just go. Ethan, I have a better idea. I'll meet you at the cafe tonight. We'll figure this out together. I didn't want to meet him, but I knew arguing would waste time we didn't have. So I agreed. When I told Vince I needed to run an errand, he didn't question it. But as I left the apartment, I had the sinking feeling that someone was watching me. At the cafe, Ethan was waiting in our usual booth, his face set with determination. I have something, he said, sliding a USB drive across the table. It's everything I've gathered on Vince. Evidence of his operations, his meetings, his crimes. If we get this to the FBI, they can take him down. That's great, I said, though my voice wavered. But how do we stay alive long enough to do that? Ethan's jaw tightened. I have a contact, a federal agent. I'll get this to him tonight. I shook my head. It's too dangerous. Let me do it, Mom. No, Ethan said firmly. This is my fight. You shouldn't even be involved. Before I could argue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Vince. Vince, come home now. My chest tightened. He knew. We need to leave, I whispered, grabbing Ethan's hand. Now, but as we stepped outside, the black SUV screeched to a stop in front of the cafe. Men in suits poured out, guns drawn. Run! I screamed, shoving Ethan toward the alley. We sprinted down the narrow passage, dodging crates and trash bins. Behind us, I could hear the heavy footsteps of Vince's men. Ethan reached the end of the alley first, but as I followed, a hand clamped down on my arm. I turned to see one of Vince's enforcers, his face cold and expressionless. Charlotte, he said, boss wants to see you. I struggled, kicking and thrashing, but it was no use. Ethan's voice echoed behind me as I was dragged toward one of the SUVs. Mom, go, Ethan, I shouted. Get out of here. I only prayed he listened. They shoved me into the SUV, the door slamming shut with a finality that echoed in my chest. I could still hear Ethan's voice calling my name as the car sped away. I prayed he had gotten away, that he'd listen to me and disappear. The drive back to Vince's estate was suffocatingly silent, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional click of a radio from the driver. My heart pounded so loudly it felt like it might burst from my chest. When we arrived, Vince was waiting in the grand foyer. He looked calm, too calm, that scared me more than if he'd been yelling. Charlotte, he said, his voice smooth as silk, come here. I stepped forward hesitantly, my legs trembling. Vince, he held up a hand to silence me. Do you think I'm a fool? He asked, his tone deceptively soft. No, of course not, I stammered. Then why, he continued, taking slow, deliberate steps toward me, have you and your son been playing games behind my back? My stomach dropped. He knew everything. "Vince, please," I began, my voice breaking. "Ethan's just a kid. He doesn't understand." "Oh, he understands perfectly," Vince interrupted, his calm veneer cracking. "He's been working with the feds. Do you have any idea what that could do to me? To everything I've built?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't know. I swear. Please, let him go. He's just trying to protect me." "Protect you?" Vince laughed bitterly. "The irony, Charlotte, is that I was protecting you. I trusted you, and you betrayed me." He motioned to one of his men, who handed him a tablet. Vince tapped the screen, and a live feed appeared. My heart stopped when I saw Ethan on the screen, cornered in a warehouse, surrounded by Vince's men. "No!" I screamed, rushing toward him, but two of his guards held me back. "Your son has been very busy," Vince said, his voice cold, "but I'll give you a choice." I froze, my breath hitching. "Your son's life," he said slowly, "or yours." The words hit me like a freight train. "You don't have to do this," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Please, Vince, let him go. I'll do whatever you want." "I already told you the terms," he said, his expression unreadable. "Choose, Charlotte." The room spun as the weight of the decision pressed down on me. My mind raced, searching for a way out, but there was none. I thought of Ethan, his laugh, his stubbornness, the way he always stood up for what was right. He was my son, my everything. I couldn't let him die because of my mistakes. "Take me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Vince raised an eyebrow, his expression softening for just a moment. "Are you sure?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sure." He sighed, almost as if he regretted what he had to do. "You always had a strong heart, Charlotte," he said quietly. "It's a shame it had to end this way." The last thing I saw was Vince nodding to one of his men before the world went black. Some say you see your life flash before your eyes when it ends, but all I saw was Ethan. I hoped my sacrifice was enough to save him, enough to give him a chance to live. When the news broke weeks later about the takedown of a major crime syndicate led by a brave young whistleblower, I wasn't there to see it. But I didn't need to be. Ethan had done what I couldn't. He brought down the monster I'd once loved, and in doing so, he honored the only thing that had ever mattered to me: family. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This will help me work better and faster for you. I would be grateful, so watch my other videos.